Members of the African intelligentsia, I greet you. This is the largest plot yet against Captain Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso. Last night, the 23rd of September 2024, the military government of Burkina Faso released breaking news bearing the details of an elaborate plot to remove Captain Ibrahim Traore. This plot involves people residing in Ivory Coast. And I want to thank our sister, True Mamle. I'll link the video in the description box. And I want to thank her for translating the video from the original French. She got it from the original source. I believe it was radio or TV Burkina Faso. And she was able to translate the press release in its entirety. So I will link it in the description box directly to her channel. But this plot involved Burkinabés residing in Ivory Coast, very high-level individuals, current and past, civilians and members of the military personnel. The government of Burkina Faso is saying that these people, high-level operatives, were residing in Ivory Coast, also known as Côte d'Ivoire, and were supported by the international community. You'll recall that on this channel, we've been talking about this. We've been saying that something is afoot, and you'll see why. So these high-level operatives that plotted this elaborate coup were residing in Ivory Coast and were supported by the international community, as alleged by the government of Burkina Faso. They were supported by the intelligence services of certain Western countries. What does that mean? That means your FBIs, your CIAs, your French GSC, I believe it's called, the intelligence services of the Western countries. These operatives included civilians of various backgrounds, as well as current and former military personnel of Burkina Faso. So here's where it begins. They signed a contract with Islamic State terrorist groups and provided them with strategic area-specific training for the specific targets assigned to them. And the attack that you saw in Barcelona on the 24th of August last month, where I believe 400 Burkinabe civilians died as they were digging trenches, the volunteer defense forces, yes, that was part of this grander plot to destabilize the country and unseat Traore. And there were at least 3 groups. These terrorists that they signed contracts with were divided into 3 groups. Group 1 was to move on Ouagadougou and take the presidency. At the same time, these were simultaneous attacks that were supposed to take place. This thing was meticulously planned. Group 1 was to move in on Ouagadougou and take the presidency. At the same time, Group 2 was supposed to attack the drone base. You all know that there's a very effective drone base that Burkina Faso uses to repel terror attacks, even in neighboring Mali and Niger. So group 2 was to attack the drone base in order to prevent a counterattack by Burkinabe military forces. At the same time, Group 3 was supposed to disperse Burkinabe fighting forces, backup, covering group 1 and 2, that sort of thing. Others were supposed to target the airport to block reinforcement from outside. That means to block help from Niger and Mali primarily. In late August, I believe around the time of the Bassa Logo attack, 2 individuals were arrested without identification at the entrance to Niamey. If you have ever been to Burkina Faso, Niger, or Mali in recent times, since the military governments took over, there are checkpoints leading from any border, any entrance to that country, straight into the capital. So if you drive into Ouagadougou from, say, the Ivorian border by bus or by car, you will run into countless military checkpoints. And every mile or so, your bus will stop or your vehicle will stop at a checkpoint, and they will check your ID or your, whether it's your passport or your national ID or whatever it is. And if you don't have ID, they will give you a hard time. They will turn you upside down and shake you like a plastic bag. There's no human rights abuses involved. I'm just saying that they will interrogate you all the way from the border straight into the capital. Of course, it's necessary because the capital is the seat of power. And that's how they arrested these first 2 that then led the Burkinabe authorities, the Nigerian authorities, the AES authorities to the larger plot. So these 2 individuals were arrested without identification at a checkpoint at the entrance to Niamey, the capital of Niger. Their leader was the former head of special forces who was supposed to be on a training program in Morocco. And he turned out to be the head of operations for these planned attacks. When they were arrested, they were transferred to Burkina Faso. Remember, they were arrested at a checkpoint outside of Niamey. They were transferred to Burkina Faso for interrogation. And as they began to talk, it was discovered that this whole plot was being orchestrated by Burkinabe nationals living abroad. And there are at least 15 names that were called by the Burkinabe military government in terms of those leaders that were involved in different aspects of the operation. So the first name that was called was Aziz Diallo. He was the former mayor of Dori. Mr. Diallo is reportedly currently working for an NGO in the Central African Republic. Mr. Diallo is said to be one of the masterminds of the plot. It is alleged that Mr. Diallo was in contact with an Islamic State terror group in the Sahara through one of his uncles based in the same town of Dori. Okay. The second name that was called was Usman Diallo. And he is the uncle that is being referred to here. Remember, the government said that Aziz Diallo, former mayor of Dori, was in touch with Islamic State terror groups in the Sahara through one of his uncles. Well, the name of the uncle is also being called here, Usman Diallo. He's the uncle of Aziz Diallo. And Usman Diallo, the uncle, is former coordinator of negotiations with terrorist groups under Henry Damiba. You remember former President Henry Damiba? Well, Henry Damiba, if you don't recall, he was the one that took over in the previous coup before Ibrahim Traore. And when he failed to deliver on the national security issues, Then Ibrahim Traore unseated him and took over. So Henry Damiba, keep his name in mind because he is being referred to in this story as the leader of the military aspect of this plot to unseat Traore. And I believe this is not the first time we have seen his name in association with a plan to unseat Traore. The third name that's being called is Aziz Dabo. He is said to be an ex-agent of the National Intelligence Agency. His alias is Elbow Lionel. Aziz Dabo, ex-agent of the National Intelligence Agency of Burkina Faso. The fourth name that is being called here is Abdoulaye Bari, and his alias is Le Voyageur, or the Traveler. He is the link between the Western powers. Remember at the beginning, the government of Burkina Faso said that this plot had been supported by Western intelligence agencies. So Abdoulaye Bari is reportedly the link between the Western powers, the terrorists, and the Burkina Faso military. Key individual. You'll see his name come up later on in the story. The fifth name that is being called is Serge Maturian. I hope I have that right. This is reportedly a Nigerian journalist of Ivorian origin. He is the representative of Abdoulaye Bari, Le Voyageur, in Niger. Maturian is said to have hosted an individual named Kamana Kahinde on August 29th of this year to help him escape and to facilitate the infiltration of the entire commando group into eastern Burkina Faso. That's group 1, group 2, and group 3. Barry had asked this journalist to keep 4 satellite phones for use in fatal operations, according to the Burkina Faso government. The next name that is being called here is Jibril Y. Basole. He is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Burkina Faso. So this is not no small plot by a group of military officers that think they can unseat Traore and take their turn. This is an elaborate plot that involves people who know the inner workings of Burkina Faso's government. So the next name that is being called here, N. Ahmed Bari, former president of Seni. I don't know what Seni is. The next name that is being called here is Alpha Bari. He's also a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Burkina Faso. The reason why you're seeing former ministers of foreign affairs and other civilians involved in this plot is because the West is simultaneously handpicking their incoming government officials. All of the soldiers you see involved in this plot will return to the barracks, handsomely rewarded, no doubt, and the civilians will take over from there. We also have Commandant Francois Zongrana, aka Cesar 10. Caesar 10. It sounds like he's active duty. Another name, Commandant Herman Zongo. He provided information to the terrorists and those leading them on the positions of aerial vectors and army movements. That means he is also active duty. The next name that is being called here, I'm not sure whether this is a woman or not, Major Joanne Campauri. Joanne Campauri is former managing director of an entity called Tsunami. His or her job was to look out for kamikaze drones. Another name that is being called here is Colonel Zala, who works for the UN in the Central African Republic. The next name we have Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henry Damiba, the mastermind. His alias is the Patriarch. He's being called the Patriarch. Remember, we ran into his name a few minutes ago. He is the one who was unseated by Traore. Colonel Paul Henry Damiba is heading the military side of this entire plot. So movements of troops, those who are reporting on drones, all of that. Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, working with the terrorists, that's his job. Of course, the West is using him to great effect here because more than anyone, he would have the biggest axe to grind with Traore. The next name we have, Lieutenant Colonel De Romeo Wuba, aka Rodriguez. He's head of the Operations Center in Accra. So this plot, the Operations Center, was located in Accra. And as we go on, you'll see the various locations where activity was taking place. The government of Burkina Faso is saying that several other officers outside of the country who are still being investigated collaborated with those inside the country. Interestingly, the government of Burkina Faso is saying that they used two particular modus operandi. One was disinformation. So you want to be able to spread disinformation so that you can confuse the population and turn them against their leader. And as you run your plot underground like an internet cable, and then you bring it to the surface at the end. But when you spread disinformation at the top, then it looks like, oh, the people just turned against their government and voila, we took over. So the disinformation campaign was one of their major tools. The other thing that is interesting here is that the government of Burkina Faso is officially saying that the leaders of this plot used occultic practices to sow confusion. The government of Burkina Faso is saying that several marabouts were consulted by Mr. Abdoulaye Barry. Remember, Abdoulaye Barry was the one named the voyageur, the traveler. He's the link between the Western powers, the terrorists, and the military. He's bringing this whole thing together. So he's the liaison between all parts. He's the general coordinator. And so, yes, this thing has to go smoothly under his watch, under his leadership. And so the government of Burkina Faso, according to those that they interrogated, the prisoners that they interrogated, Abdoulaye Barry, aka the Voyager, consulted several marabouts, helped by Chief Sergeant Tendena. This Sergeant Tendena, his alias is Taylor. So with the help of Sergeant Tendena, aka Taylor, who is also a former Special Forces operative, arrested by the Burkina Faso Intel Services, they consulted several marabouts. Tendena recruited elements for destabilization apps. Remember the disinformation. Tendena also made contact with his father, a marabout in the Bogunde area, to ensure that the terrorist infiltration went smoothly. Let's pause here for a moment. If you go back over the playlist on this channel, you will see that we do a lot of prayer. There are videos where we've gone into prayer for the Alliance of Sahelian States. And some of you may think that that's complete nonsense. Do you see? Do you see? We've done other videos asking Africans What has African spirituality done for you? And some of the major African voices, major channels on YouTube that go into African issues have been up in arms about this African spirituality business. Oh, we don't believe in Jesus. That's the white man's God. We've done videos on this channel that said, if you don't believe that the West, your enemies, are also using African spirituality, think again. There are videos on this channel that deal with this whole African spirituality thing, where we are saying that, listen, the West is also using it, and they're using it to greater effect than you are. And the balance of power that's been distributed from wherever that power is coming from is not equal. And this African spirituality is now what is being used. For those of you who have been promoting African spirituality on YouTube, this is the African spirituality that is now being used against the alliance of Sahelian states. It's being used against the alliance of Sahelian states to destabilize Burkina Faso. So we proceed. Tendena, aka Taylor, former Special Forces operative of Burkina Faso, also made contact with his father, a marabout in the Bogunde area, to ensure that the terrorist infiltration went smoothly. So, for those of you who still believe in African spirituality, there's your answer. It can be used for evil. And I don't know about too much good that it gets used for either. Okay, so remember Kahinde? Kahinde's alias, Kahinde is Major Ahmed Kahinde. His alias is Akuchi. So Kahinde, alias Kahuchi, remember, he was the one that was hosted by the Nigerian journalist, and he was supposed to facilitate the movement of the entire commando group into eastern Burkina Faso. So after Kehinde was arrested with the two terrorist leaders at the checkpoint leading into Niamey, Niger, it was initially decided that the intel would not be divulged to the public so that the intelligence services of Burkina Faso could discover the full extent of the network. So they got this information and they kept it under wraps until they completed their investigations. So the government intercepted communications, and those communications revealed the involvement of several economic operatives in the plot. And the government of Burkina Faso is saying that the recordings of these conversations are forthcoming over the next few days. The government of Burkina Faso is also saying that other civil society leaders taking part in the exchanges via WhatsApp were also involved. And guess what the name of the WhatsApp group is? It's called Ibe Dégagé. That means Ibrahim Traore Dégagé. Ibe is the name the Sahelians called Ibrahim Traore. If you remember, when they had that meeting back in, I believe it was July, to formalize the AES body, the three of them, Ibrahim Traore, Assimi Goita, and General Chiani, the three of them met in Niamey, and they walked from the airport or from where the plane landed all the way to the facility where the event was being hosted. And you saw people chanting all along that route, especially the young people of Niger. Ibe, Ibe, Ibe. Anytime you see Ibrahim Traore travel on foot, anytime you see him travel on foot, that's the name you'll hear. Ibe, Ibe, Ibe. That means IB, and it's short for Ibrahim. Okay, so Traore's name is Ibrahim Traore, and IB are the first two letters of his name. So we could say he is affectionately called by the people of the Sahel Ibe. Okay, so the name of this WhatsApp group is Ibe Dégagé. Dégagé in French means to remove. So the name of the WhatsApp group is Remove Ibe. So that alone should tell you all you need to know about this plot. If you join a group on WhatsApp called Ibe Dégagé, you already know that this is a group that's intending to unseat the head of state of Burkina Faso. Okay. The government of Burkina Faso is also revealing that most of the planning meetings were held in Achimota, Ghana. I mean, this is intense. Most of the planning meetings were held in Achimota, Ghana, and at the Jide Lodge Hotel in Accra. Other meetings were held in Tamale, also in Ghana, in the presence of Abdullah Bari, the voyageur, the traveler, and Lieutenant Colonel Wuba, the Romeo Wuba, aka Rodriguez. Now, Akuchi, who is Major Ahmed Kainde Tendano, and the two terrorists that were arrested at the checkpoint leading into Niamey were accompanied by the teams from the government of Burkina Faso during the investigation. And they showed the storage site for the various types of equipment that were purchased for this coup plot. The site was being heavily guarded by terrorists paid by the commander. And it was located not far from a town called Tenko Dogo in Burkina Faso. Once the government of Burkina Faso team arrived, the terrorists tried to escape, but a fire exchange ensued, and they and several other terrorists were neutralized. Now, here is the most surprising part of this. The government of Burkina Faso is saying that other destabilizers are still proceeding with a new fine-tuned plan. And there's a meeting scheduled to take place in Nigeria on September 27th, 2024. That's in about 3 days. They're planning to recruit new terrorists in Switzerland. They're planning to recruit 500 mercenaries from a European country for large-scale attacks in Ouagadougou. They're prepared to open fire on civilians in the event of a popular pro-Traore uprising. You'll recall that when the Nigerian team went to Niamey the other day to meet with the Chief of Staff of Niger, we did a video on this channel saying that the Nigerian Chief of Staff that visited Niamey, his whole team looked uncomfortable. They looked like they were on surveillance. Well, this meeting is scheduled to take place in Nigeria on September 27th. to plan a new fine-tune attack on Waga to unseat Traore. Um, that doesn't mean that the Nigerian military is involved, but it doesn't mean that they are not. And you see the scale and the scope of this thing. Recruiting new terrorists in Switzerland, 500 mercenaries from a European country for large-scale attacks in Waga. And these terrorists are going to be prepared to open fire on civilians in the event of a popular pro-Traore uprising. You may have heard after the first two plots to unseat Traore failed, the youth got out into the streets one night and announced to the entire world that if anybody tried to unseat Traore, they would not have peace in that seat. The youth had vowed to disturb their government until it was toppled. And so the people planning this new operation are cognizant of the fact that all over the AES, not just Traore, but Chiani and Govt, they are cognizant of the fact that even beyond the AES, Africans all over the world, even in the diaspora, are in favor of the progress that is being made in the Sahel. And the people of these three countries in particular are solidly behind their leaders. And the plotters of this coup are cognizant of this. And so they have instructed their terrorists to open fire on civilians in the event there is a popular pro-Traore pushback, uprising against an attempt to unseat Traore. Here's one of the worst parts of this. The government of Burkina Faso is alleging that the leaders whose names we've just called, Barre, Diallo, Kahinde, the whole group of people, Paul Henry Damiba, the whole group, in order to protect their own families, they sent them out of the country. These former ministers of foreign affairs, these are people with means. These are people that have money. So what they've done is to send their family members out of the country, their wives, their children, immediate family members. They've sent their family members out of the country. And the government of Burkina Faso is saying that those who were scheduled to attend the meeting in Nigeria have been identified. That's, of course, Major Ahmed Kainde, aka Akuchi, Mr. Abdoulaye Barre, the Voyager, one Dala, who was disbarred from the National Armed Forces, one Withdrawal Seku, Romeo Wuba, aka Rodriguez, and other people from Nigeria. I guess they're going to be hosted by people from Nigeria. There was also the name in this mix, Gabriel Basole, as well as other elements of Western intelligence services. Okay, so it will be difficult to believe that the armed forces of Nigeria and the government were not involved in this, because the government of Burkina Faso is saying that all of these Burkinabe actors, plotters, leaders of this operation are joining forces with other with Nigerians and other elements of Western intelligence services. And so based on the intel that the government of Burkina Faso has received, they are all documents are being handed over to the intelligence services so that the court hearings can begin. And the Burkina Faso government, in closing, had three words for the coup plotters: playtime is over. More to follow as developments unfold.